Welcome back. All right, so it's Friday afternoon. Baseball's in the news right now, so I might as well discuss a little bit of baseball on the Entertainment Guy channel here. In that, they're meeting informally today, but with Rob Manfred canceling the first two series of the season, it throws everything into chaos, right? And so there's been talks of what the problem is. I'm not going to get into the where the problem is or what the problem, because honestly, it really comes down to owners want to, and I know the term that's already been used by the union is they want to break the union. It's more of trying to break the union's will. And eventually, owners will likely win this. Owners will usually be the ones that win. They're billionaires fighting against millionaires. Now, in baseball, there are players who get close to being billionaires, insane amount of money in the world of baseball. But what's interesting is that this is a sport that I think understands they need to change a little bit with the times, because while the money's really good, your demographic keeps getting older. Your demographic keeps going up in age, and the fact that that's going on means young kids aren't watching it. And it makes some sense. Basketball has garnered so much more attention now than it did before the days of Michael Jordan, but I think it's more popular now than during the days of Michael Jordan. So, where the NBA keeps growing, and any time that you have a professional league and you have a group of owners that run that league with the players, you're going to have some kind of resentments there. You're going to have disagreements. It's not going to happen where everything's all harmonious all the time. But once you get into canceling games, that's when it's real, right? And so last year we knew that this was coming. It feels like they didn't know this was coming. And what's frustrating for fans is that these are all issues that could have been worked out a year ago. These are all issues that could have been worked out without needing to cancel games. These are issues that they should have been working on just as hard as they're trying to work on them now. There should have been talks every single day until they came up to some kind of an agreement or a compromise was reached, right? It's very frustrating as a fan of sports to watch as multiple leagues go through this and they don't learn their lesson. That whole idea of learning history so you don't repeat it. Sports doesn't have history in it, so who cares? It's the same thing. And of course, one of the contentious issues was apparently that Major League Baseball, they want to implement changes faster than a year. So basically, they bring up an idea of a change, and it takes a year before they implement it. And they want to say, nah, we don't want to have to wait. So one example is a pitch clock. The idea of a pitcher having, say, 30 seconds to throw a pitch. I'm not in favor of a pitch clock because some pitchers work different than others. I don't think that the speed of the pitches is necessarily the thing that drags the game down. You have so many times now where a pitcher's changed out, so many times where a hitter's changed out, so many timeouts during the game. Now they've added reviews, so you got to review to see if home run, foul ball, what's going on. It's really made the game, I'm not going to say unwatchable, but it's tough to watch an entire game. I can't watch an entire baseball game. I know when the Blue Jays play that they have Blue Jays in 30, which is basically the game condensed to 30 minutes on Sportsnet. I can watch that, but a full game, it really depends. I miss the days of pitching matchups where you knew both pitchers were likely to go the distance, and I understand why baseball changed. And this is where sometimes there's a disconnect between what I'm saying and what people I think are necessarily hearing. I understand why we have all these matchups, why we have all these advanced stats, why you switch out your pitcher, you don't send him a third time through the lineup. I get the idea of why, but it doesn't make it more watchable. It doesn't make it more entertaining. It doesn't make it more entertaining to take a pitcher who's allowed 3 hits through 5 innings and take him out of the game and go, well, that's the third time through the order, so he can't stay in. And so I remember one thing that was a draw for me as a kid to watching baseball was pitchers like Nolan Ryan, right? Where Nolan Ryan, you knew he was going to pitch a lot. Steve Carlton, he's going to pitch a lot. He's going to get a lot of strikeouts. And he's probably going to play the whole game. Jack Morris. And these kinds of pitchers who would go out there and they would pitch a lot of innings. And, they'd get lit up every now and then. But they also had complete games and they had shutouts as well. And complete games and shutouts are not as much of a deal now as they were, say, back in the 80s. where I thought baseball was very watchable as a kid. I really enjoyed it. And now, to me, it's kind of a slog. It is hard. And I think part of it is that you don't have the ace pitchers as you used to. There are still ace pitchers, don't get me wrong, but it feels completely different than it did. You have some teams have maybe a 6 starter rotation. Maybe there's 4 starters and a couple of openers. And it's I think harder now to create your mega star in the baseball world than it is to create one in football, basketball, or hockey even. And it's based on a lot of that, and especially when it comes to pitchers. But I mean, that's part and parcel of the problem. And I think the owners understand there's an issue there, but they also really don't like the players. So that doesn't help. And you have players that probably understand that baseball probably needs a bit of an update, but they really don't like the owners. So when the owners are saying things about pitch clocks, they're saying things about, hey, we want to be able to mandate rule changes when we feel like it. I can understand players saying, well, wait a minute, because you're telling us about this, but what else are you going to sneak in, when that takes place? And I understand, too, that they've agreed on a universal DH. There are baseball fans that want the DH gone. They would like to see the pitcher have to hit in both leagues. So the idea that we'll get the DH in the National League and the American League, there are fans who aren't going to like that. And so you've got an aging fan base, and now you're telling some of them, yeah, we know what you want, but we're not going to give it to you. And that's part of the problem, too, is that whatever they come up with out of this, if it's going to cost us games during the regular season, now they have to make sure they come up with some kind of a plan out of it that makes it worthwhile. So if they just sat down and they had a lockout that didn't affect the regular season, and then they sign an agreement, we're not going to be as demanding as if you lose regular season games. You want to see real change. I'll go back to hockey on this. Coming out of the 04-05 lockout, the NHL understood, and they encouraged scoring. They made big rule changes. They really changed the game. If baseball is going to go into a prolonged lockdown, they can't come back the same. They can't come back with the exact same game. Nothing's changed, because fans won't like that at all. They'll be like, wait a minute. We lost baseball, and it was for nothing. The players make the same amount of money. The owners make the same amount of money. Nothing's really changed. So the pressure's on both sides. The owners definitely have way more money than the players. There's more room there for them to just sit and wait it out. The other part that I find funny is that when you get into lockouts, a league that's making a ton of money all of a sudden says, we are losing so much money. You're not going to believe how much money we're losing. It's ridiculous. And every league does it. It's part of the negotiating. It is. I think it's a PR ploy more than anything. I don't think it's legit meant to make players feel bad about making $10 million a year. I think it's meant to get fans on the side of the owners, on the side of the league. The NHL does it every time. You'll see Bettman throwing money around, and then all of a sudden, there's a new CBA, and he hides the money, and he's like, okay, all you owners, hide your money, hide it. We're all broke, and that's just part of the negotiating. And they'll use this with fans too. At some point, I'm sure an owner will be quoted as saying, ticket prices in baseball have gone up, and it's on the players, and we need to, straighten this out. And I will say this for baseball too. The other thing that makes it tough is there are definitely teams that are kind of feeders for the big teams. And if a small market team's doing well, but they don't really have a budget, that small market team is doing well now. But as soon as those guys need a new contract, they're going to the Yankees, they're going to the Red Sox, they're going to the Dodgers. And so that makes it tough too. And again, the NHL understood that. They brought in the salary cap. It hasn't been perfect, but it has allowed for an environment where any team can succeed. Not that every team does. And I think for baseball, I think that would be an important message too, though I don't know how much owners are on board with that, and I don't know how much the players would be on board with that. I've never had the feeling from baseball that there is as hopeful for a salary cap as other leagues have been. I've never got the feeling from baseball that players necessarily worry about the small market clubs that aren't able to compete for a World Series. But we'll see if things change coming out of this, where apparently there's already talk about draft lottery and them agreeing on how to get a draft lottery done. But there's a lot here. And again, the frustrating thing as a fan is this could have been dealt with last season during the regular season. Sit down and talk. Hash it out. Make it work so that you can avoid the lockout. It is very frustrating to watch as leagues wait until the very last minute to negotiate, and then all these issues are out there that absolutely should have been hashed out last year during the regular season. You would think with the last 2 years and with everything that the COVID's thrown into the air and everything's all over the place, that they would have smartened up and realized, hey, the economy right now is bouncing back. We really need to be part of this economic resurgence, and instead they're locking players out. And I think they locked the players out so the players wouldn't go on strike. That's normally the way that works too. I don't necessarily think players, if they didn't have a CBA right now, would be out there playing without any kind of a contract. The other part I find interesting is right before Major League Baseball went, and we're losing money, we got to lock them out. Guys were signing huge contracts. And again, I'll come back to hockey because it's the best comparable from the most recent comparable. When the National Hockey League has a CBA coming up and they're not sure what's going to happen, you can tell because players aren't signing massive long-term or huge money contracts. They'll stop that summer before they know what's going to happen. The 04-05 lockout, there were so many free agents because the NHL knew we're shutting down. We don't know what the financial landscape's going to look like going forward, so we're not signing anybody right now. Baseball, no, here's $40 million for you and $50 million for you and $30 million for you, and well, I'm broke. Can we lock him out now? I don't get it. It's and keep in mind, this is a sport that's lost market share and has an aging population watching it, which is honestly happening across a lot of sports, team sports in general. I'm not sure what the reason for the demographic shift is, but there's definitely a shift to older with the team sports. Now, pivoting from that, I want to talk a little bit about the wrestling world too, because there's a couple of items that I keep seeing stuff about, so I might as well talk about it. AEW has bought ROH. Ring of Honor was my favorite wrestling, period. I want to say 10 years ago. About 10 years ago was my favorite wrestling. The end. That's it. The only problem I had was, at the time where I was watching it, Adam Page and Adam Cole looked a lot alike, and they were both named Adam, and I was having a hard time keeping them separate at times. So I'm glad that at this point, one of them's Hangman and one of them's Adam, and they look completely different from one another. But yeah, it was. But that's a minor quibbling. I absolutely love the Briscoes. I think there's a decent women's roster there. I've watched some of what they've been doing lately. They had a couple of women's of honor nights as well, where it was all the women's wrestlers, which I thought was a nice touch. And I would like to see something like that more in wrestling, where, and I've mentioned this before, where I think WWE would benefit from having a women's only show, and just to see if women's wrestling can work on its own. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does, but give it a shot, just see. So yeah, AEW buying ROH is great. Danhausen's been very entertaining when he's in AEW. He hasn't wrestled yet. Now, I know he had the broken foot. It's possible that's not 100%, so that may very well be why he's not wrestling. But it shows that Tony Khan has the money. He's a billionaire, and I think it's a really smart purchase. Now, the rumor that ROH may become a developmental system for AEW, that would honestly be... That'd be a pretty decent move on their part, as long as they make it where it's on its own, like what NXT used to be from WWE, where it was kind of almost like its own company, and it had its own feel, and everything was different. So you could have ROH with a lot of the younger wrestlers that are currently on Dark or Dark Elevation that need more work, and you could put them in ROH, and then for Dark and Dark Elevation, you could have more veteran wrestlers. You could bring in ROH guys. And this does allow for a lot of surprises, right? WWE wasn't submarined with this apparently either. They had interest in buying the ROH catalog. The reports on WWE were never really that they were interested in owning ROH itself and running anything, just that they would be interested in the catalog, which would be consistent with Vince McMahon. You buy the company, so you have the rights to all their footage, and then you move on. And so you might hire a couple of the wrestlers, but that's not really your prime concern. Your prime concern is have that content that you can then use digitally online on your network and just have it there, and that you own it. That you own the wrestling world. So AEW buying ROH means they have access to that catalog, and a lot of the AEW stars were also in ROH. One thing I liked too was that in AEW this week, they actually had handshakes. They actually had the handshakes, and I like the handshakes before and after the matches in ROH. I always thought that was a nice touch. I like it when a company has something that's a little bit different from the other companies. So hopefully, with the buying of ROH and the fact that Tony Khan's a wrestling nerd, hopefully that means that stuff stays in place. And of course, the big speculations on Cody Rhodes. Now there's rumors that maybe he's going to end up back in AEW. Here's how I view Cody Rhodes. Cody Rhodes comes from one of the greatest wrestling families ever, because Dusty Rhodes was one of the greatest wrestlers I ever saw. One of the first matches I saw that made me fall in love with wrestling was a 1 hour. It was the whole show. It was a cage match between Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes. It was the best cage match I ever watched. Now, there was a cage match between Tito Santana and Greg the Hammer Valentine that was close. That was around that same time. But to me, the Dusty Rhodes, that cage match was fantastic. Dusty won that, and then Ric Flair won the title back, I think it was a couple of weeks after. Dusty was always better chasing the title than he was as champ, right? So Cody Rhodes, coming from that family, and of course Dustin Rhodes, also known as Gold Dust, it's a very famous family for very good reason. Cody Rhodes, if he goes to WWE, may get a monster push out of the gate. That's possible, but I don't know how much of a draw Cody Rhodes is. Now, the way they treated him at the end with the whole Stardust thing was ridiculous. I thought that was terrible. He did his best with it. He made it work because Cody can make that work. But when he was in AEW, the problem I had was that Cody Rhodes, for me, he's kind of an upper mid-carder, and I don't see him as a main event draw. He doesn't get the kind of ovations that a Bryan Danielson gets. He doesn't get the kind of ovations Jon Moxley gets. He doesn't get the kind of ovations that CM Punk gets. And I would even go as far as say Brody Lee during his time in AEW. Eddie Kingston's another one. People love Eddie Kingston. And I don't know that Cody Rhodes can get that level of support from fans, and maybe not from people backstage either, right? So if Cody Rhodes goes to WWE, my expectation for him would be an Intercontinental title match, maybe a U.S. title match, and a feud with somebody like a Shinsuke Nakamura, somebody like maybe start off with Sami Zayn. And I say this not as like an insult to Rhodes, but this idea that, right out of the gate, he should be in a feud with Roman Reigns. Why? And I say that because when Cody was last in WWE, he was not at that level. I still don't see him at that level. And the way he was booked in AEW, he certainly was not at that level either, where he was losing matches, and he was gracious in all of that. But why would he get a main event push from WWE, especially when WCW went under and WCW guys went into WWE? They were always portrayed as being the lesser, right? You were in WCW, you were a star there. This guy's a WWE star. He will beat you. And okay, in this feud, you're going to get a match win, but in the end, the WWE guy's going to beat you. Cody Rhodes was in WWE before AEW, but right now he's seen as an AEW guy. I would be very surprised if he was in a main event picture in WWE. And if this is really about money and about prestige, I don't know that WWE would necessarily give that to him. And I still think AEW is the best place for him. I also will say this, though. He needs to turn heel. And even in WWE, if he comes in as a face, they'll cheer him the first week or two. But eventually, they won't cheer him. And that's the problem that Cody has. Certain wrestlers can't get over his heels. Certain wrestlers can't get over his faces. The Miz has always struggled when he's tried to be a face. It does not work for him. and he accepts that, and he still makes a lot of money. He does a lot of good things, and he's got a lot of sponsorships and all that, and he's got his own show with his wife, of course, and the lovely Maurice, who I've absolutely thought is fantastic for a long time. Not that I thought gave her due necessarily at the time or even now. She's basically Mrs. Wife rather than the fact that she had the title, and she was a good wrestler. Not fantastic, not like Paige or Charlotte level, but she was a good wrestler. But I really don't see Cody Rhodes being over as a face either. I think it would be the same problem. I think you get that big pop that first day, that first show he comes out, the crowd will go crazy, and then I'll say by week 3 or week 4, that'll settle right down, and eventually the crowd would turn because it's what happens. And so he'd have to turn heel, which apparently was his problem in AEW. He did not want to turn heel because he has all of these, sponsorship deals and all these charity things he does. And he felt that if he was a heel, he might lose that. I think that kind of thinking is out of date. I think we all understand that the character we see on screen is not who they really are. And so if you're a bad guy on TV, great. But it doesn't mean you're a jerk in real life. Maxwell Jacob Friedman's a good example of that. You can see when Friedman wrestles, he takes care of the guys. He doesn't hurt people. He's a really good worker. He clearly has studied the craft very well. He just portrays his character every time he's out in public. So if he's doing an autograph signing, he is still MJF. So you don't get to see him out of character at all. So he lives the character. But it doesn't mean that MJF outside of the character is a jerk necessarily. And so it is, to me, it's kind of outdated thinking, but maybe it's Rhodes being in the industry as long as he's been, which is basically his whole life. He may see it differently from a lot of us, but I really will be interested to see what he does, because there's an obvious in here. And this is where people will turn around and point and go, so it was a work. Cody Rhodes, ROH. So the first show of ROH, under the new AEW banner and AEW buying it, Cody Rhodes comes out and says, actually, I run the show here. And Cody Rhodes in ROH acts as sort of a surrogate for AEW and could do very well there. And then you could do almost an invasion storyline. Obviously, people would roll their eyes at it. You'd have to do it well. You can't do something exactly the same as what's been done with another company, or you're going to get rightfully criticized. But they could have some fun interactions between the two. They could have a gentleman's bet with AEW and ROH. You could have a pay-per-view between the two companies and make that work. So I'll be interested to see what they do. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about either the ongoing lockout with Major League Baseball or with AEW and with the whole Cody Rhodes thing. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.